Hello everyone, this is part 26 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Shizuku. Naruto took an involuntary step back, his shakuju falling from his loosened grip as he stared at the very girl he had cried over, in his bee-stained arms. It was her, really her. The familiar dark blue chakra coursing through her body didn't lie to him, this was really Shizuku. Except it wasn't, he didn't need an all-powerful dojutsu to see that. Lines and cracks crossed her pale skin and clothing, looking like she had been pieced together from the remains of some impossibly intricate porcelain doll. Her eyes too, instead of the normal bright vibrant eyes he remembered the girl possessing, her sclera were now a dark, sickly gray. Naruto. The impossible girl smiled sadly at him, one of her arms lifting slightly towards him slightly before she seemed to think better of it, returning the limb to her side. She was exactly as he remembered seeing her last, even wearing the same clothing, camouflaged to match the dismal atmosphere of Mizu no Kuni. It was as if somebody had taken a snapshot of her last moments and reconstituted it before his very eyes. Quote. Is it really you? A faint smile traced her thin lips as Naruto found his face struggling to hide the flurry of emotions cascading through his being. Your hair is longer and you got taller. The blonde nearly cracked at that, even her voice was the same, containing that same quiet lilt that he had so enjoyed listening to when they spoke. But your eyes, it really is you. Naruto took another step backwards, making a small frown crease Shizuku's cracked features. Shizuku, how are you here? I don't understand. He was really struggling at this point to keep the tumultuous emotion he felt out of his voice, but he could help the small crack in his voice. Quote. I saw you. Shizuku's timid smile turned downwards as she instinctually put a hand up to her tea, sending a surge of memories through Naruto's mind filled with shades of scarlet and crimson sullying that same pale skin. I remember that. She seemed confused by it herself, suddenly looking up and around at her surroundings, her eyes widening in surprise at the sprawling village around her, filled with sand and various shinobi cocooned within it. What is going on, Naruto? Where are we? However, before Naruto could say anything, if he could have said anything at all in his shocked condition, a low and menacing chuckling sounded out across the stretch of rooftop. Naruto's eyes widened as something seemed to grow out of the very tiles behind Shizuku, although the violet seemed unable to turn and look, seemingly frozen in place by that voice. Oh come now, answering everything would ruin the fun, wouldn't it? Before the blonde's very eyes, a tall, pale man with long dark hair emerged from the roof, his body slumped forward limply. He wore an outfit consisting of grey trousers and a dark brown shirt with an earthen tunic thrown over, held in place by a thick purple rope tied up into a bow-like knot at the back. He brought his head up, capturing the blonde with his piercing gaze with two golden eyes, like a snake's. Two distinctive purple markings traced the edges of his nose and the corners of his eyes, furthering the resemblance to the reptiles he emulated. Although I suppose having you flounder around in the dark would only serve to amuse me for a short time. The man seemed genuinely thoughtful at that, looking up and to the side as he brushed a single finger against his chin contemplatively. Finally a long, sadistic grin slowly spread across his pale features as he laid a thin white hand against Shizuku's shoulders. The girl was seemingly frozen in place, her discolored eyes opening wider at the touch. Yes, having you know would be so much more satisfying. His gaze once again fell on the blonde, golden eyes meeting rippled violet as he leveled a playful but still dangerous look at the younger monk. What are you talking about? Having this man appear had alleviated some of the shock at seeing Shizuku, and Naruto had managed to gather himself. However, something was nagging at the back of his mind, something he felt he was supposed to remember but wouldn't quite come to him. Considering his near photographic memory, it was rather irritating. I suppose the question is just how much to say. The man didn't seem to even be paying attention to Naruto, stuck in his own world as he contemplated whatever it was he was thinking. Well, how about this? He slid the pale hand he had rested on Shizuku's shoulder up her trailing it through her long purple hair before resting atop her head, cupping his other hand under her chin. Do you like her? I brought her back especially for you, Naruto-kun. It took me ever so long to find the samples I had left of her DNA. His smirk became even more sickening as his long tongue slid from his mouth, licking across his lips in a way that made Shizuku cringe in his grip, somehow unable to move when this man held her. You're just lucky that I never throw out possibly useful samples, even for failed experiments. Naruto found his hands tightening into fists without him even realizing it as the man referred to Shizuku that way. Otherwise I might have had to disturb that lovely monument you made for her, very touching by the way. His voice had all the sincerity of a snake, ruined even more by that ever-present smirk that split his face. How did you find that? Naruto was beginning to lose his control over his emotions. Seeing this man hold Shizuku like this, talk about her like this, it was too much for him. The man seemed pleased by the emotional outburst, his sickening smirk growing wider as his eyes flashed with something unrecognizable. Oh, but you leave quite the trail, Naruto-kun, and I have agents everywhere, waiting to diligently report every scrap of useful information to me like the good little pets they are. Again Naruto clenched his hands tighter, beginning to turn his knuckles white as this man casually dismissed the importance of all those human lives. Did you really think nobody would notice you? Did you think that the hero of Kirigakure would remain a secret forever? Nothing can hide from me, Naruto-kun, especially not somebody with eyes as remarkable as yours. Naruto could practically feel the man staring intently at his eyes, a predatory glint entering his own. But right now that's beside the point. He began running his fingers through Shizuku's hair again, making the violet grimace from the feeling, and Naruto clench his fist even harder in anger and frustration. I asked if you liked her, if you appreciated all the effort I went to in order to bring her back. Am I not benevolent? His sickening smirk told otherwise as he casually gazed at the young blonde before him, unconsciously drawn to the ringed eyes set into the boy's skull. What do you mean bring her back? What is this? The man just chuckled again darkly, his voice managing to reverberate around the area despite the fact they were outside. This, my young Naruto-kun, is the result of the Edo Tensei no Jutsu, a remnant of out dear Nadaime Hokage that I completed. It pulls the very soul out of the pure world, locking it inside a corporeal form again and puts them under my control. Naruto fought to rein in his anger at that. The very idea of what this man was spouting was sickening to the boy. However, his eyes widened slightly as he felt a pang of hypocrisy run through him. Was that not the very same thing he did to Haku? However, there is the small matter of it requiring living humans to use as vessels, but for immortal soldiers with infinite chakra I think it is merely a small price to pay. At that Naruto almost breathed a sigh of relief. No, he was nothing like this man, able to so callously throw away human lives. So that is your intention, you brought back Shizuku to fight me. Naruto frowned at his own words. The thought of seriously fighting Shizuku almost made him feel ill. To see her once had been a crippling blow to him, to actually repeat that but at his own hands was just unthinkable. Even so, when it came down to it he was more powerful than Shizuku, even before she had he had only grown in strength since then. However, Orochimaru just grinned excitedly. He did so enjoy these conversations, when he could truly crush the hope inside of somebody. Oh no, of course not. Sensei and the Kazekage are fighting the reanimations of the Shodaime and Nadaime Hokage as we speak. However, they are merely mindless drones, fit only to be tools to accomplish what I want. The man slid a kunai out of the pouch on his leg slowly, a paper talisman hanging from the end of the hilt as Naruto's eyes widened in realization. However, for you that just wouldn't do. Having you fight a mindless puppet would serve no use. Another sinister smirk see across the man's expression as he idly spun the kunai by the ring on the hilt. Not to mention it wouldn't be nearly as entertaining. Before Naruto could even move he suddenly plunged the kunai, the whole thing, straight into the back of Shizuku's head. Orochimaru. The Sanin's eyes widened in a small amount of surprise as the boy cried out his name just as he pulled his hand back out of Shizuku's head. Ah, you finally figured it out. I suppose the rumors I've been getting about you traveling with my dear teammate are true then. Tell me, how is Tsunadheim doing these days? Still deathly afraid of any kind of responsibility, I suppose. However, no answer came from the blonde. He was transfixed, watching in morbid fascination as the many cracks and lines across Shizuku's body began to close. The color returned to her skin slightly and small bright spark entered her eyes once more, something he remembered so vividly from their time together. Ah well, I suppose I can get my answers another time, Naruto-kun. The sickly sweet voice finally snapped Naruto out of his daze as his eyes widened in anger, his fists trembling by his side. You bastard! In flash a long, but more importantly sharp, black rod had slid out of Naruto's baggy sleeve, instinctively being caught in his hand at the exact same moment his other was raised, pointed at Orochimaru with the palm wide open. Banshu Tenon. Orochimaru's eyes opened wider slightly as he suddenly found his feet lifting off the ground and his body flying through the air. There was a sickening squelch as the Sanin's body roughly impacted with Naruto's, his head over the smaller blonde's shoulder. My, aren't you just full of surprises? Naruto's eyes opened wider as the Sanin's voice rang clearly from right by his ear. He could feel the chakra rod embedded in the man's heart. That was why he could tell thus was not the real Orochimaru. Sure enough, a moment later the color on the man's body began to change into a uniform brown as the earth-natured shadow clone began to disperse. However, before he was gone entirely, the dissolving clone managed to turn, capturing the blonde's gaze with his now dulled, brown eyes. Enjoy this now, Naruto-kun, you will seek me out eventually, one way or another. Then he was gone, devolving into nothing more than a brown puddle on the tiles of the roof. Seconds later he wasn't even that, blowing away as nothing more than dust on the wind. The blonde just stared at the spot for a moment, shocked at what had just happened. He didn't get long through as his senses warned him of danger. Suten, Bakusui Showa. Naruto managed to dive for his dropped shakuju just in time to launch himself off the ground and up into the air, his eyes widening as an enormous wave of water washed underneath him, the force of which was enough to completely crush the buildings behind the stadium and leaving a thin layer of moisture on the ground. He wasn't given any respite when he landed back onto the ground, instinctively bringing his hands up in front of himself. Suten, Teppudama. Shinra Tensei. The tremendous wall of force he created was just in time to catch the powerful bullet of water, twice the size of Naruto himself. He could literally see the force of the gravity shockwave ripple across the sphere's surface before it harmlessly fell to the ground, its momentum lost. When it did, Naruto was able to see Shizuku standing behind it, her hands still locked in the snake seal and an incredulous look on her face. Shizuku. The violet seemingly snapped out of her shock, looking up at Naruto with wide eyes before her hands began moving rapidly again, finally stopping on the bird seal. Naruto, watch out. Suten Daibakufu no Jutsu. All around Shizuku water began rising into the air. From the liquid on the ground to the very moisture in the air, it began to coalesce above her at an astonishing rate. Then, all at once, an enormous vortex of water shot up into the sky before turning sharply right above Naruto, a veritable waterfall of roaring water. This time Naruto stood his ground more calmly, raising his hand up slowly as an invisible wall of force rippled from his body. The jutsu stood no chance, harmlessly dissipating against the indomitable force of Naruto's technique, not even leaving so much as a light spray to fall on him. All the while his eyes never left Shizuku's panicking form. I can't control my body, Naruto. It's moving on its own. Even as she spoke, her hands were racing through seals that she didn't want to perform. It was like she was only there in consciousness, a mere passenger in her own body, watching helplessly as she attacked the person she cared about more than anything in the world. It didn't matter to her that none of her attacks were getting through. She had the same revulsion to hurting Naruto as he had to her. Suten, Dai Taihouden. Her hands briefly paused on the tiger seal before she brought them both out in front of her, palms out. Her eyes widened in shock when Naruto did nothing to move out the way of her attack, even as thick streams of water began to grow from the moisture in the air, violently circling her small body. She was still getting used to just how powerful her attacks seemed to be all of a sudden. Back when she was still learning in Mizu no Kuni, even this much would have tired her out by now, not to mention she had never managed attacks of this magnitude. Now all of a sudden it felt as though her chakra supplies were infinite and each jutsu put hardly any stress on her body. At the last second, as the streams rotating around her body all came together in one enormous river that used her hands as a focal point to condense and concentrate, Naruto raised a single hand. The expected wave of force never came though, instead sand from the ground and the surrounding rooftops suddenly leapt forward as if each grain was suspended from some invisible wire at Naruto's beck and call. Faster than Shizuku's jutsu could reach him, it formed a tightly packed, half-dome-shaped wall in front of him. Almost instantly the compacted sand began to turn to a much darker sludge against the O of the powerful water technique. However, that only made it heavier and more difficult to control. With Shukaku's cooperation, Naruto was quite easily able to hold his shield together. More surprising though was when the entire structure began to move forward, changing shape to better resemble a plow. Instead of simply absorbing the water, now it redirected it, up and out of any harm's way, sliding off the sand like it was metal. Finally, Shizuku's jutsu ended, unable to be sustained any longer as her chakra capacity completely ran out. Her reserves might have been endless, but there was still a limit to how much she could use at once. The sand immediately rushed forward, pulling up fresher, still dry sand from the surrounding area as it lurched out, wrapping around Shizuku in a loose dome. Naruto caught one last look at Shizuku's face, at her silent expression of relief, before the dome collapsed, spinning around and cocooning the girl within almost a foot of the chakra-reinforced earth. Naruto stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, not out of exhaustion or even exertion, simply because of the shock of what he just did. It didn't last very long though. Seconds later, a small patch of the sand cocooning his lost friend turned darker, and moments after that a small stream of water trickled out, pooling in one spot. A head of purple hair formed first as her body slowly began to rise up, reforming itself from the surrounding moisture. In only seconds, Shizuku stood there again, unharmed and fully reconstituted, that same saddened expression marring her cute face. Naruto almost cursed himself for forgetting Shizuku's hydrification technique, however he had never seen her use it to this extent before. It seemed that whatever this Edo Tensei jutsu did to control her also made her abilities work to their fullest extent. Naruto, please. She looked up at him, her altered eyes catching his own in a pleading expression as her hands began to twitch upwards. Her body was already reacting to the fact it was free, preparing itself for the next attack. Quote, You have to fight back. Tears began to stream down her pale cheeks as she fought the control this jutsu had over her as best as possible, her hands still itching to move into hand seals. Naruto just stood there unmoving as his body struggled to catch up to his racing thoughts, desperately trying to think of a way to capture Shizuku without harming her. Shizuku, I can't. The Violette's head dropped slightly, causing a few bangs of hair to fall messily across her face. It made Naruto's heart ache to see it, as he remembered many occasions when they were talking when he would instinctually reach across to brush her hair back over her ear. When she finally looked back up again, a faint, sad smile ran across her lips, her darkened eyes expressing her resignation. I know you don't want to, I don't either, but you have to. Quote. She finally stopped struggling against the invisible puppet strings guiding her body, allowing her hands to begin racing through seals again, stopping on the tiger seal right in front of her mouth. So I'll have to force you, Kirigako no Jutsu. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the results were immediate. A thick rolling mist suddenly surrounded the pair. It stretched far off into the village as all the available moisture in the air and on the ground was concentrated and condensed into a thick, shroud-like fog. Naruto only faintly heard the sound of a sword being drawn from its sheath before silence swallowed him up. You remember this, don't you? Naruto turned to where he thought the voice came from, that same hint of sadness and regret telling him just who it was despite it being muffled. It seemed to reverberate through the mist, as if it came from every direction at once. The blonde frowned. He certainly did remember this, the day when Ao had introduced Shizuku to one of Kirigako's most dangerous and feared techniques. That wasn't to say Shizuku had become a master of the silent K technique by any means, she was far too kind-hearted for that, however she had an advantage where others did not. Usually a Kiri ninja wanting to learn the technique would have to dedicate months of intense and brutal training to completely extinguish the sound they made, rendering their opponent's senses useless in the scentless, sightless fog. However, thanks to Shizuku's unparalleled control over the water element, even in her untrained, unrefined state, she was able to thicken the mist to the point where it did the sound dampening for her. Of course, she only ever used it for knocking opponents out or leaving them for the other ninja. However, with her body being controlled as it was, Naruto didn't suspect she would be holding back anymore. You seemed so unsure on the day our sensei gave me a tanto, even then I could tell you wanted nothing more than to shelter me, protect me. Her voice still echoed, making Naruto unable to trace where it came from. He caught the occasional flicker of a shadow that might have been her, but it was gone before he could turn. But I wanted so much just to be useful to you, to do something you could be proud of me for. Even through the muffling of the mist, Naruto could hear the slight catch in her voice, the faint sob that a year ago would have had him rushing to see what was wrong. I was always proud of you. It was out of his mouth before he could realize what he had done. A second later he just managed to catch a flash of silver out the corner of his eye before he dodged to the left. He caught the slight whine of a blade through the air far too close to his ear before it was gone, back into the oppressive mist. The worst part was that he couldn't even use Yagura's technique in here. Shizuku's control over her element was even stronger than his. If he recklessly used his Deva path he could risk hurting her as he had no idea where she was. You have to fight back, Naruto. If you don't then I won't stop. This body will not stop. Naruto grit his teeth as Shizuku's voice called out again, his grip tightening around his shakuju. I can't. His eyes widened again marginally as he was once again forced to move to the side, aiding his movements with a burst of wind chakra for speed. Once again the flash of a blade passed close to his body, however this time the terrible screech of metal on metal shrieked out inside the mist. Naruto looked down at his arm in surprise, not having even realized he had activated his Asura path. There was a light scratch there that was already beginning to fix itself. He grimaced at the cold feeling he always got when using this aspect of his abilities before his eyes opened wider in realization. Naruto, please, this is the only way. His head whipped around. Shizuku's voice was now becoming desperate as she realized just how close she had gotten to hurting Naruto. The blonde, however, remained calm, rising up a little and focusing on his breathing, his Rinnegan straining to see anything but the chakra saturating the air. No, it isn't. This time he made no move to react even as he felt the flash of steel draw closer, however Shizuku's blade didn't hesitate in the slightest, singing as it through the air. There was a moment when her discolored eyes opened wider in shock before Naruto moved like lightning, literally. Sparks of electricity briefly danced over his body, enhancing his muscles' reflexes and supercharging his synapses for a brief second. It was all he needed. In a flash of movement he turned, holding a palm out, and Shizuku winced, expecting to feel the heavy impact of unrestrained gravitational forces. However, it never came. When she opened her eyes again they widened in abject shock. Naruto was just standing there, her blade driven up to the hilt through his hand. Strangely there was nothing to indicate he even had a wound at all, however Shizuku failed to notice this in her shock. Almost immediately her controlled body attempted to remove her tanto from its impromptu sheath. It was fruitless though as Naruto curled his hand around the blade, grimacing from the uncomfortable feeling. It wasn't actually too bad, the pain was more like a dull throb, more to indicate that he had actually been hurt than for the feeling itself. It was a strange, discomforting sensation that his own body wasn't quite his, as if he were merely moving unconscious strings on some unbelievably complex puppet he controlled. He hated using it, doing so felt like he had lost his arm, or whatever body part he was controlling with the Asura path at that particular moment, however right now it was necessary and that was what was important. Naruto. Shizuku's faltering voice and widened eyes betrayed her shock, even as her arm continued to uselessly pull at the sword, her body not quite realizing it was stuck yet. Naruto ignored the strange feelings from his arm as he looked up, meeting the not quite eyes of the girl he had watched be out in his own arms. As much as he wanted to try and stay emotionless, to keep his own thoughts and feelings out of this to do what he knew he had to do, he just couldn't. His expression softened as the smallest of smiles peeked at the edges of his mouth. Shizuku, I missed you so much. The girl's eyes trembled slightly as her mouth struggled to form words that wouldn't come. Here she was, standing before the boy who had saved her all that time ago, finally able to say the things she couldn't, and she still couldn't. Her head drooped down, her hair falling across her face and shadowing her eyes even as she felt the first teardrops begin to percolate on the edges of her vision. Please Naruto, Kami. Naruto's eyes widened, but only for a moment before his expression once again settled into a soft smile, his own head lilting slightly down. You know I can't do that, Shizuku. The girl's head shot up, tears now freely streaming down her porcelain cheeks making a few strands of her hair stick messily to her face. Then what? You have to do something, Naruto, or I'll be forced to kill you. Her voice became quiet as her whole body shook slightly, even as her one arm continued to fruitlessly pull at her tanto. I don't want this existence is horrible. If you don't kill me, then I'm stuck like this, fighting whoever that man tells me to kill. Me now would be merciful compared to that. She stopped trembling though as Naruto looked up at her, his expression warm and inviting in a way she remembered so vividly. While an entire year had passed for the monk, it was only yesterday Shizuku was staring up at him through increasingly blurry vision, wiping away that solitary tear. What if I could bring you back, for real? The girl blinked in surprise, staring at Naruto, unable to comprehend what he was saying. However, the monk's face seemed completely serious. I did it for Haku, I can do it for you too, I'm sure of it, Naruto's eyes widened when he felt Shizuku's finger press up against his lip, noting that the limb was shaking, obviously taking a great deal of her will simply to do that much. Please Naruto, let me go. Naruto took an involuntary gulp as he stared at the girl before him, blinking away his shock. But, she pressed her finger a little harder, halting what he might have said again as she looked up at him imploringly, her wide watery eyes like a deep well that Naruto couldn't tear his gaze from. Please Naruto, just let me go. I don't belong here anymore, my time passed. She looked down again, her hand falling away as she lost the control to hold it there. My time to do the things I wanted was then, it's gone now. I will always regret the things I could never say. She looked up at Naruto again, her eyes tearing up as her hand began to struggle more violently against the solid grip the blonde had on her sword. But regrets are for the living. Please Naruto, let me go. Naruto began to feel tears form at the edges of his own eyes, but he blinked them back. But, I couldn't save you. Shizuku gave him a watery smile as she managed to get a hand back up to his cheek, trembling from the effort it took to fight the jutsu controlling her body. Gently she wiped at Naruto's eyes, choking out a short, hollow laugh as she caught one of his tears before it could fall. Maybe you weren't supposed to. Slowly, with a great deal of effort she moved her hand down to Naruto's, grasping his wrist in a loose hold and guiding it back up until it rested just above her. Please, just do what you can, set me free. It was Naruto's turn to tremble as he felt the girl's slow, rhythmic heartbeat below his hand. It felt so real, so alive. Shizuku. The girl's eyes widened slightly as she felt her sword begin to give, sliding noisily with a sickening shriek against the metal of Naruto's skin. Please Naruto, you have to do it now. Naruto just trembled, his hand flexing indecisively against Shizuku's sea even as the sword pulled back even more. He looked up, trying desperately to smile, to project the warmth he so frantically wanted to convey, but it was weak and stained with the beginnings of tears. I'll never be able to let you go. Shizuku froze for a second, even the arm pulling at her sword paused momentarily as she looked around, the air becoming utterly calm for that exact moment. Finally she smiled, genuinely, her lips crinkling up in a way Naruto remembered well. He used to relish that smile, work for it each day he kept Shizuku safe. Thank you. Then it was gone. Naruto pulled back his hand, and with it the ethereal white form of Shizuku's soul, tearing it right out of her body with the sickening noise of ripping fabric. He held it there for a few moments, frozen in place as he felt the silk light being swayed gently in his hand, the frozen form of Shizuku before him already beginning to dissipate into an ashen substance. Then, as one, both blew away in the breeze, one returning to the earth it was torn from, the other floating away back into the sky it belonged to. The blonde stood there, unable to move even as the heavy mist around him began to disperse, the chakra sustaining it gone now. He faintly remembered Shizuku's last words to him, but this time he paid them no heed. Tears freely flowed down his face as he fell forward, collapsing to his knees as he released all his sorrow, all his frustration and pain out in those small droplets of liquid. It felt good, unbelievably so, to cry out all the anguish he felt, letting it all wash away in the streams traveling down his face. Finally he stood, a little shakily but keeping his feet firm, wiping at his face to remove the last of his tears. Slowly he turned to the bright purple barrier that was just now becoming visible through the fading mist, his features setting into a cold mask. His hands tightened momentarily around his shakuju before he started to walk, his eyes burning with something indeterminable. Deep in his mind he could feel her memories, her feelings. When he touched her soul he took more than her life, he took her essence. Shizuku would always be with him, everything that made her who she was would always be there in the back of his mind, driving him forward, reassuring him. Right now though he had to put that aside as he strode forward, not even slowing down as he passed straight through the burning barrier. He had only one goal in mind now and everything felt so crystal clear to him. He faced the forest of wood inside the barrier with cold, steely eyes as he raised a single hand, feeling the flood of chakra rush through his form as it swelled into a brilliant crescendo in his palm. Shinra Tensei. Hiruzen was forced to throw his creaky, aging body to the side once again as an enormous blast of water that hadn't been there a few moments ago roared through the spot he had been standing in just a moment ago. This had been the common theme for the past few minutes, dodging one attack or the next from his former sensei and his brother. However, Hiruzen, aside perhaps Homura or Koharu, knew his sensei better than anybody else, and it was easy to tell that whatever it was that Orochimaru had done to remove their personalities was affecting their combat abilities as well. It was either that, or with their personalities suppressed, Orochimaru had to rely on information about their abilities. Hiruzen could be so lucky though, if the Shodaime were allowed to enter his Sage mode or the Nadaime began using his early version of the Hiraishin, he knew he wouldn't have anything left to give. The Sandaime Hokage might have been called the god of shinobi, but he knew his predecessors were his superiors in most ways. The sheer raw power of the Shodaime just couldn't be surpassed, and the Nadaime's skill and tactical planning were the stuff of legends. Even in his prime, when the other four Kage had feared seeing him on the battlefield, he was sure this would have been a tough and ultimately downhill battle. Even now he feared Jiraiya would be quite easily able to defeat him, especially if the boy managed to get time to enter his own Sage mode. The man sighed wearily as he used the adamantine staff, his most prized possession and dearest companion, to skillfully vault up and away from a set of growing branches that would have otherwise ensnared him. Sparing a quick glance across, he caught a flash of gold as a devastating earth-style attack was blocked by a near-impenetrable shield of gold dust. He had to admit that the Yondaime Kazekage was a man worthy of the lure, able to use his unique Jiten abilities with surprising skill and creativity to match the Sandaime Tsuchikage blow for blow. However, the aging Hokage knew it was only a matter of time before the legendary fence-sitter began using some of his more feared techniques, namely the Jinten, dust release. Hiruzen had never seen the legendary Keke Tuta before, however he had heard stories of it from his sensei, the very same man he was attempting to fight right now. On that note, he was once again forced to throw his tired bones out of the way of yet another potentially crippling deluge of water. The sheer speed and volume the man was able to draw from the atmosphere alone was just phenomenal. However, this time the elderly Sarutobi was prepared, using his bow staff to catch onto a nearby branch, flicking himself up and onto the sturdy bough, already racing through well-worn hand seals. Doton, Doryu Tiger. He didn't stop on his final hand seal though, even as a molten wave of mud began flowing out from him, quickly cannibalizing the surrounding tiles. Already he was layering his chakra, layering it over and over inside of himself as he rapidly converted its nature from the slow-moving, heavy earth into something lighter, more volatile and far hotter. Kaiten, Kayu Enden. His hands finally paused on the tiger deal, aching from the speed he had to move through the various signs. He took a deep breath, kneading and fanning his chakra until it was a veritable inferno before releasing it all in one great breath. It came out as a white-hot, intense stream of flame, like a true dragon's breath, roaring over the mudslide he had created. The normally slow-moving, sluggish mud was set aflame, broiling under the heat of the fire technique until a river or burning, molten tar was racing towards the two resurrected Kage. This was what had made him famous, made him feared for simply being, his ability to create collaboration jutsu entirely on his own. The Nadaime Hokage tried to react by conjuring water as a defense, however the dry, arid air caused by the burning tar offered little for him to take. His defense was nothing compared to what it could have been had the Edo Tensei not held him back and his reincarnated body suffered for it, immediately catching alight as the tar finally reached him. Hiruzen barely paused to watch, still unable to see his former sensei suffer through this. Unluckily for him, the Shodaime had more time to prepare, quickly creating a large dome-like barrier of wood. That same barrier had once managed to halt a Bijudama in its tracks and, even weakened as it was by the control Orochimaru had placed over him, Hiruzen's collaboration jutsu stood no chance. However, it did buy him time, allowing him to briefly hunch over, breathing heavily as he rested his hands on his knees. His partner seemed to take notice of this as a large silver-haired monkey seemingly grew from the end of the adamantine staff. "What are you doing, Hiruzen? You know now that you are far too old to be using these jutsu in collaboration so recklessly, your body just can't take the strain." The elderly Hokage offered up a tired smile as he pulled himself back up, straightening into the proud image of what a Hokage should look like. "Come now, Enma, I've known many a shinobi able to fight well past my age. The king of the monkey contract huffed irritably, arms crossing over his muscled sea as his eyes showed the lack of amusement he felt as he slowly watched his long-time friend Kei himself. Yes, and all of those were either Senju or Uzumaki, neither of which you are. Hiruzen just let out another weak laugh as he cracked his N, really starting to feel the strain on his tired bones. He had really let himself get out of shape over the years of peace. However, he would gratefully allow himself to grow complacent in peace than keep his village suffering through the horrors of war. Yes, that's true I suppose, but you shouldn't be worrying about me old friend, right now our best bet is to help the Kazekage. His gold dust is our only chance of subduing the two Hokage long enough for me to deal with Orochimaru and hopefully end this horrific defilement of my sensei and his brother. Hiruzen looked grim as he saw the Nadaime begin to regenerate, his ashen body reforming from seemingly nothing. Otherwise I fear I will be forced to use that jutsu. Enma widened his eyes as he looked the old man he had fought beside so long. He was about to argue but he managed to catch a glimpse of something, a steel in the old man's eyes that hadn't been there in many years. Finally the boss summon of the monkey clan let out a gruff snort as he began to fade back into his staff form. In any case, it had been an honor fighting alongside you again my old friend. Hiruzen's features softened for just a moment as his hands tightened slightly about his weapon. He was far too old for this fighting business, but that didn't mean he wouldn't sa warrior's death to save his village. Likewise, he got no response from the staff as he settled back into his bujutsu stance, feeling every creak in his old body. However, before anybody could react, and before Hiruzen had even managed to gather his breath, the ground suddenly rumbled beneath their feet. Floor tiles were shaken loose as a few of the weakened branches from the Shodaime's expansive forest fell from their oddly angled trees. Everybody managed to look around in the apparent direction of the force before having to shield their eyes as a good section of the chakra-fueled forest they had been fighting in was suddenly blasted inwards. Bark and wood was scattered across the area as dangerous shrapnel causing all but the reanimated Hokage to shield themselves. Hiruzen managed to bat the worst of it off with the adamantine staff while the Kazekage formed a quick shield from his gold dust, unintentionally shielding Unoki at the same time. Finally Orochimaru sank into the ground, allowing the bits of sharpened wood to par harmlessly over the spot he had just been standing in. His eyes narrowed as he realized just what was happening. Everybody was forced to keep a hand over their eyes for just a moment as they looked at the bright, gaping hole in the foliage after fighting in the darkened conditions for so long. However, in that brief instance their eyes widened at the sight of a man's silhouette, his cloak billowing lazily behind him as he held his shakuju firmly in one hand. However, that didn't capture their attention, nor did the horns seemingly rising from the man's forehead. It was his eyes. In that brief moment, when only his outline could be seen, everybody managed to catch a glimpse of those violet, ringed eyes, burning with a cold, dispassionate glare. However, the moment passed as the skilled shinobi's eyes managed to adjust to the new light abnormally quickly, a testament to the strain they had to put on the bee over the years. In the place of the imposing figure, shrouded by darkness and casting a dangerous glow with his legendary eyes, stood a young teenage boy with messy blonde hair. Hiruzen's eyes opened wider as he caught sight of the boy. Even if his whisker marks had somehow vanished and his eyes had changed from the cerulean blue he remembered so fondly, there was no mistaking the child standing in front of him, intruding on a battle between Kage like some divine intervention. Naruto. The boy's gaze, already far too old and stern for his youthful appearance, momentarily softened as he caught sight of the man that had acted like a grandfather to him in his childhood. Aside from the Ichiraku family, he had been the one little ray of happiness he was allowed to experience in his otherwise isolated and bereft life. Hey Gigi, it's been a while. Fu had to breathe a fast sigh of relief as she managed just barely to flit back from where Han's meaty fist would have otherwise caved in the side of her head. With him now entering his tailed state, even if the cloak wasn't quite as well defined as Fu's was, the gap between their speeds and power was beginning to drop again. Even this time she only just managed to dodge thanks to the thin layer of ice coating the ground, making Han's footing less stable while doing nothing to affect the speed Fu could fly at. She would have to thank Haku after all was said and done, although she had to reconsider that too, if they made it out of here alive. As Han got up, his rage beginning to show on his face as another tail sprouted from his own cloak. Fu was already up to her three-tail state and the strain was beginning to make itself apparent, even if for some reason it didn't seem as bad as it used to be. The tingle on her skin had become an irritating burn, and it was becoming more and more difficult to withhold all the negative emotions that might cloud her judgment. She caught a flash of light out of the corner of her eye as a storm of ice senbon flew through the air towards Han, a panting Haku on the other end of them. The large Jinchuriki almost paid them no mind, only offering up a token hand to swat them away. The ice, hardened as it was by Haku's impressive chakra control, was still no match for the virulent, burning chakra that surrounded Han. Right now all Haku could do was act as somewhat of a distraction, but already he looked to be feeling the drain on his reserves, his movements slowing and his attacks becoming less refined. However, it was enough for the moment as Fuu's third tail flicked once to the side. She used the opportunity Haku had given her to dart forward, ignoring the pain across her body from where Han had managed to catch her a few times with those pressurized punches. She poured all her speed in, knowing that her time in this form was already running out. Soon she would be running on little more than vapors, and Han would be easily able to finish the two weary combatants off. Haku's distraction did its job though, keeping Han's attention long enough for Fu to get in close. The red giant rocked back as the Biju-backed blow struck him clean across the face, not having been able to react in time to meet the oncoming threat. However, the cloak around his body had no such restraints. As Fuu's wings angled themselves to take her away from the armored behemoth, the two bubbling red tails shot out at her, attempting to enthrall her in their burning embrace. They were only partially successful. Fu only had one tail to effectively fight with, the other two used for flight, so she managed to fend one of them off, however the other managed to wrap around her arm. She winced slightly as she felt the malicious chakra constrict around her limb before twitching violently, flicking out and away from Han as it sent the mint-haired Jinchuriki flying across the street. Unable to right herself in time, she crashed straight through a sturdy wall, impacting with two more before finally stopping in the crater of a third. With somewhat of a struggle, she managed to pull herself out limb by limb before collapsing ungracefully to the ground. Her cloak had taken most of the impact for her, but being thrown through two different buildings hurt, no matter how protected you were. With a groan though, she managed to pick herself up, still repressing the pain on her skin as it slowly blistered beneath the foul chakra she wore. Her two tails buzzed experimentally once before picking her off the ground, just in time too, as immediately after she was able to flit to the side, avoiding as Han's two tails came crashing down through the ceiling, the giant following soon after. She flew straight past him, flying up and out of the hole he had made in the roof, continually dodging as he continued to send his tails after her. Once she was a safe distance above the raging giant, she took stock of the situation, panting heavily from the exertion. It was no use right now. Fuu's superior power and speed weren't enough to bridge the gap between the two Jinchuriki's respective experiences. Han was able to throw her around like the bug her Biju emulated and didn't even seem to be breaking a sweat over it. What Fu needed was to seriously increase the gap between their powers, however she just didn't have the time, or better said, Han wouldn't give her the time. However, as if he were reading her thoughts, Haku suddenly appeared on the roof of the nearly collapsed building in a rapid shunshin. As Han picked himself up from his devastating drop, Haku was already racing through Han's seals. However, even Fu could see the exhaustion in the boy. It was evident in the way his hands moved more sluggishly than normal, in the way his posture wasn't quite as correct as he usually held himself. He was in a battle between Jinchuriki, one of pure power and stamina, and he just didn't have the endurance to keep up. Even Fu could see he was running on less than fumes, and yet he continued to try. Finally he reached the end of his inordinately long string of hand signs, holding the last one for a moment as he blinked away his exhaustion before both of his hands down on the roof of the shattered building. Ice began to spread out from the contact, quickly coating the ground like winter sped up. When it reached the gaping hole in the roof, it just kept going, spreading across the gap as a thick, translucent plate of ice. Almost immediately one of Han's tails struck out at the new obstacle, however much to Fuu's surprise the chakra-reinforced ice held, if only just. A long, dangerous crack spread out from the point of impact, yet it was already beginning to heal over. Han seemed to notice this as well, repeatedly bashing at the surprisingly sturdy ice. However strong as it was, it couldn't stand up to a repeat beating from two chakra tails. Fu could already see Haku tiring under the strain of repeatedly fixing all those cracks. He wouldn't last much longer. The mint-haired Jinchuriki wasn't about to let his effort be in vain though. Already she was reaching inside herself, feeling that vile, bubbling well of chakra that had been the bane of her existence for the first 11 years of her life. She pulled on it, taking as much as she dared as she cringed inwardly. Outwardly though the change was more apparent. Her cloak thickened, sprouting 2 more wings in rapid succession. All sense of definition was lost though as the once crisp layer of red deformed into a bubbling, almost liquid mess. She just about had sense to hold back until the very last minute, until Haku's ice couldn't hold on any longer. It burned all her around her, excruciatingly so. Her skin felt like it was being repeatedly flayed, only to immediately heal to start the whole process again. Below, her hand seemed to realize what was going on as his attack on the ice became more frantic, bashing away at it with his own bubbling tails. Finally, there, the ice cracked and for once it didn't repair itself. Haku was finally spent, unable to continue. Fu's glowing orange eyes narrowed briefly as she tucked her wings in about her, already feeling the shift of the air currents as her body spun. Tsubasa no Kaiten. Her voice came out harsh, gravelly, as if distorted through some aged speaker as she continued to spin, faster and faster until she was nothing more than a thin red blur in the sky. Then, she dropped. Han stood no chance as the unstoppable revolving mass of chakra barreled towards him, easily shattering the partially destroyed ice in the way without even slowing down. Smoke and dust erupted like a geyser from the point of collision, shrouding the streets outside until the enormous shockwave that immediately followed blew it all away. Finally, when it all cleared and Haku was able to take his hand away from his eyes and mouth, he was able to look down and see the deep crater Fu had created with her attack. It was oddly shaped, looking more like it had been drilled from the earth as opposed to simply gouged out like most impact craters. Right at the bottom though, at the center of all the spiraling damage, lay Han, his sea armor shattered and his breathing slow and shallow. Nearby Fu was staggering to her feet, not looking at all stable as she wobbled about, unable to find balance in her weakened state. Her body was riddled with burns from the vile chakra as well as the far too rapid rotations of her own attack, and Haku was amazed she was still able to even stand. However, he was proven partially wrong when the girl collapsed to her knees again, using her hands to support herself as she knelt there, shuddering through the pain, unwilling to allow herself to fall to unconsciousness. Haku was by her side in an instant, supporting her shoulders despite being completely exhausted himself. Finally, the two managed to get into a somewhat comfortable sitting position, just breathing slowly as they tried to regain their lost energy. Fu wanted nothing more than to rush off and try to help Naruto, but in her current condition she would be useless to him. So what do we do with him? Fu looked around, somewhat surprised as Haku's voice suddenly seeped through the silence before looked across to where he was limply pointing at Han's unconscious body. She shrugged tiredly, barely able to think, never mind decide what to do with this hulking brute of a man she was fairly certain neither of them could lift. However, their decision seemed to be made for them as she saw a curious tendril of sand enter the destroyed building. It seemed to linger around them for a moment, as if looking at them, or perhaps sniffing them like a dog might, before quickly moving on. With it came more, and soon a small river of sand had entered the crater, slowly wrapping the unconscious Jinchuriki up in its grainy embrace until only Han's head remained. Fu simply sighed in relief, glad that her job seemed to be done now. It was like a small burden being lifted from her shoulders, and like that, she was gone. Haku watched with a small smile as Fu slumped over to the side, finally admitting her exhaustion and falling to it. He didn't though. He was tired but not entirely gone. He had enough in him to at least watch over Fu and make sure nothing happened to her before Naruto was able to return to them. He was sure this would all be over soon. If it wasn't, then some of the stronger Junin would be given time to break free and things would only get worse after that. Hiruzen found himself speechless as he stared at the young boy he hadn't seen for over 6 years. However, he didn't get long to gawk as Naruto reset his features, pulling something off of his belt as his gaze drifted over to where the Nadaime had finished regenerating as the Shodaime was coming out of his wooden shield. He flooded chakra through the object, and once again Hiruzen was dumbfounded as the innocuous little jar suddenly expanded, quickly becoming an enormous stone pot, 3/4 the size of Naruto himself. He may not ever have set eyes on the Kohaku no Johei, but he recognized it all the same. He was the professor after all, and the artifacts of the Sage of the Six Paths did not escape his notice. It wasn't every day that you saw a stone jar suddenly grow to 5 times its previous size, although the large kanji for lightning that was supposed to be there was conspicuously absent. Naruto suddenly placed a hand on the artifact, filling the pot to the brim with his chakra as he focused his cold, unwavering gaze on the two past Hokage. Hashirama and Tobirama Senju, Shodaime and Nadaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, first user of Mokuton and unparalleled Suiten user. Both reanimated Hokage looked around curiously at the young boy, however as soon as the gaze met his their fates were sealed. Slowly, as if ink traveling through water in ripples, the two names appeared on the side of the amber purifying pot, ingraining themselves there as if burned onto the surface. Unfortunately the two Hokage were not themselves, they did not see the danger the ancient artifact posed to them. However they did react when Naruto began to run through a long chain of hand seals one-handed, still firmly keeping a grip on the pot to his side. They recognized the hostile action and reacted accordingly, both Hokage running through hand signs of their own. It was for naught though as Naruto beat him to it, finishing his chain before they could theirs. Holding that one-hand sign, his body practically boiling over with chakra, Naruto quickly pushed the lid of the Kohaku no Johei. Both former Hokage froze in place, mid-hand seal as a ferocious wind picked up throughout the artificial forest, pulling branches off of trees and sending loose shingles flying everywhere. Their bi began to stretch out, distorting gruesomely as they were pulled towards the awaiting pot. Both Hokage tried to resist, the Nadaime by grabbing at the floor and the Shodaime by sending out wooden stakes from his hand, biting into the roof below them. However it was in vain. Tobirama only found the tiles being pulled up under him and Hashirama fared no better as the roof he tried to secure himself to proved equally delicate under the harsh pull of the purifying pot. Finally it was over, the two Hokage had been fully merged with the liquid inside the pot and Naruto hurriedly s the lid back down, sealing them inside. The black kanji bearing the names flared white for just a moment before going dull, not fading away though. Naruto panted heavily for a moment before righting himself, taken by surprise at how stressful that whole sealing process had been. It felt like he was having a battle of wills between himself and the two reanimated Kage and he wasn't sure if it would have gone his way had they been in full control of themselves. Naruto. He finally turned, offering up a small smile to his grandfather figure as the man stared at him, unsure of what to say. Hey Gigi, I guess, what Naruto might have said was see off as his senses went off, his eyes opening wider just in time to throw his hand up, palm up and facing over Hiruzen's shoulder. Shinra Tensei. He controlled the blast, narrowing down as much as he could, even so the Sandaime staggered back a bit as the very edges of the technique clipped his shoulder. He turned, shocked to see Orochimaru's limp body flying through the air away from him, having emerged from a tree with his S-blade, the Kusanagi, held firmly in his mouth. The snake Sannin managed to flip gracefully and land on a tree horizontally, sticking there with chakra as if he weren't standing on a vertical surface and it was the most natural thing in the world. He stayed in a crouch, calmly observing his old mentor and the young blonde with his gleaming golden eyes. "Ah, Naruto-kun, so nice of you to join us at last. I had expected Shizuku-chan to hold you up a little longer, at least until IK-sensei here." He spoke with such casual nonchalance, a slight lilt in his voice that was at the same time enthralling and sickening, and a slight grimace of disgust momentarily found its way onto the young monk's face. "Orochimaru." The Sandaime's stern voice see through the tension, apparently having recovered from seeing Naruto. "This fight is between you and me, leave anybody else out of this." The pale man tilted his head lazily until his eyes rested on his aging sensei, staring at him uncaringly as if he was simply observing some uninteresting research specimen. Now, old man, I'll get to you in just a moment, why don't you rest those tired bones of yours?" The Hokage's face twisted into a scowl as Orochimaru's mocking laugh echoed through the expansive forest atop the roof, making even the other two fighting Kage pause for a moment before their fight continued in earnest. Those same yellow eyes suddenly flicked over to Naruto, a sadistic grin sliding over the pale Sannin's face. "I must say Naruto-kun, I had high hopes for you, but even when my clone dispersed even I was slightly disbelieving. You really did a most wonderful job incapacitating the shinobi out there." He sniffed in, as if relishing the brief moment like some fine wine. "I could have only done a slightly better job of it myself. After all, they are all mere pawns, tools that had served the use in bringing me here to my dear sensei." Naruto scowled at that. Just the way this man talked, no, simply the way this man existed was sickening to the senses. "You're nothing but a coward." Orochimaru's eyebrow quirked up in amusement as his studious gaze rolled over the blonde slowly. hiding behind men and women, giving them false promises so you can lead them to their deaths just to further your own selfish goals. Hiding behind immortal soldiers and psychological tricks instead of fighting yourself. My master told me it's better to choose a fight that will end in pain than force somebody to fight it for you out of fear. For a moment Orochimaru's soft, predatory gaze hardened into cruel, vicious glare before he caught himself, another lazy smile rolling across his features. Ah, but Naruto-kun, how can it be you're calling me a coward? Don't you see? Running away from your village in the S of night after M2 shinobi. Is that not cowardice by your own definition? Naruto's eyes widened before narrowing into a glare, his hand tightening around his staff. Taking sanctuary with monks instead of owning up to your crimes. Facing your punishment. His grip tightened again as he felt chakra burn and bubble inside his body. On the outer edge of the barrier the Sound Four widened their eyes in shock. Orochimaru-sama. The Snake Sannin ignored his subordinate though, too intent on seeing just how much of a reaction he could get out of the Rinnegan bearer. How about stealing property from Kumo? Was it not cowardly to accept their hospitality for so long only to throw it back at them? Naruto's eyes were now glowing faintly with a dull violet light as his glare intensified, his knuckles turning white from the pressure of his balled fist. And how about Mizu no Kuni? Orochimaru's predatory smirk became practically vicious as he leaned forward slightly, a sadistic gleam in his eye. Orochimaru-sama. Again the subordinate went ignored, their cry falling on deaf ears as Orochimaru continued his monologue, his voice dripping with tainted honey. Mizu no Kuni, where you allowed your friend to be mercilessly unable to save her despite the overwhelming power you possess thanks to those marvelous eyes of yours. At this point Naruto was almost trembling with rage, his chakra excitedly churning through his body, just waiting to be released. Orochimaru-sama. For a third time the desperate plea went unnoticed as Orochimaru and Naruto continued to stare at one another, their eyes locked together in an unbreakable bind. Except you didn't, did you Naruto-kun? You got your revenge, didn't you? A light blue haze had begun to form around the blonde from the sheer pressure of the chakra he was holding back inside his body. How did it feel to see the light leave his eyes? To watch as your friends ess at your hands? I bet it was exquisite. How are you any different than me? The glee in the Sannin's eyes was palpable as he watched the rage surface underneath the blonde's carefully controlled exterior. Orochimaru-sama. Finally the pale man's patience snapped as he turned angrily to the subordinate that had dared to interrupt him. What is it, you insolent whelp? Didn't I tell you? The Sannin trailed off, finally noticing the ominous shadow that had fallen over the rooftop along with the oppressive silence. All around them, surrounding the building on all sides, were enormous, impossible walls of sand, hovering just outside of the barrier. It was a desert's worth, just hanging there in the air, not even a grain falling loose with only the flaming purple barrier between it and all that lay inside. However Orochimaru was under no illusions that the barrier would hold for very long against such a deluge of sand, reinforced even further with chakra as it was. Ah! The hiss of annoyance in the Snake Sannin's voice was somewhat satisfying to the blonde as he gazed up at the sight that would have lesser men shaking in fear. It seems you played your hand quite skillfully, Naruto-kun. His gaze fell back on the young monk with that ever-present smirk still there, even if it was wavering towards a scowl. Make no mistake, boy, we will see each other again, you two, old man. Before anybody could react the slimy man managed to bit his thumb, racing through seals impossibly fast before his palm down. Kuchio's no jutsu. There was an enormous burst of smoke that completely filled the rooftop, and before it had even cleared, the massive snake Orochimaru had summoned had crashed through the sand, making a large enough hole for him to escape through as the barrier fell down around him. Naruto widened his eyes in surprise. It had all happened so fast even his sand couldn't react in time. One moment Orochimaru was there, the next he had managed to get away. Before Hiruzen could even call to him he was off, chasing after the man through the very same hole he had made to escape. Even in his haste he had remembered to grab the Kohaku no Johei, letting the artifact shrink down even as he ran. However, he had forgotten one thing. As soon as he emerged out into the village he extended his senses through the water in the air, immediately finding Orochimaru, running away from the village with his 4 subordinates. However, he also found Haku and Fu, their chakra dangerously low. The blonde froze there for a moment, his gaze flickering between Orochimaru's retreating form and his friends. Already he could feel some of the more powerful Junin breaking free of his sand, and he knew he didn't have much time, but at the same time he might never get another chance to go after Orochimaru. Oddly enough, it was Shizuku that made his decision for him. Not literally, but at the same time he just knew that was what she would have done. That was all he needed, instantly sprinting off further into the village, away from Orochimaru and towards his friends. He would never allow somebody he cared about to be hurt again, not if he could stop it. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.